Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar for faith development in smaller UU congregations and communities. I want to welcome each of you for taking part. We're making a very small carbon footprint this evening by virtually Zooming in together. If you should need some technical support with the Zoom option, please don't hesitate. I will be co-leading this evening's session with my dear colleague, Cameron Young, and we're going to introduce ourselves. So hi, I'm Nancy Combs Morgan. I'm one of the Congregational Life Consultants serving the UUA, in particular in the Mid-America and Southern regions, with a specialty in faith development. And Cameron, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Cameron Young. Pronouns are they, them. I serve also the Mid-America and the Southern regions as a congregational life consultant. My background is also in faith development and youth ministry as well.
And my pronouns.
And I'm based in Texas.
Thank you, Cameron. My pronouns, forgive me, are she, her, hers. So we would like to get a sense of who's on board this evening. If you're able to share with us your name and your congregation, and actually with your name, if you're comfortable in doing so, share your pronouns, your congregation, and do let us know what that location is. A lot of people say I'm at First. Well, we have lots of First UUs that we both serve, so please help us understand where you're located. And then your role. Are you active volunteer? Are you given the charge of helping to organize religious education, that sort of thing in your community or congregation or fellowship? And then if there's any particular questions that you may have brought this evening. Susan, would you begin for us?
I certainly will. My name is Susan Busker. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my congregation is the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Rock Valley in Rockton, Illinois. We are almost at the Wisconsin border, so a lot of our members come, from over the border. And my role in the congregation, I just was the past president, so, but I also have been in charge of our religious education program, and right now I'm on our social justice leadership team. So I've had varied roles, but working with our children and youth is something, we're a very small congregation, 33, members, and we only have 2 youth right now, but I'm just always attracted to any services, any webinars, anything we can find for smaller congregations, because I see a lot of things with larger congregations. It's just very hard to translate, so I appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. Last night we had the attendee who had taken part in a newer religious educator webinar who serves a small congregation in the Western Shore of Michigan, and I thanked her. It was her feedback, the reason we designed this program this evening. So we do want to keep our pulse beat and make sure we're supporting our smaller congregations. So I see we have Luke. Luke, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I had you on mute there for a while. Hey, my name is Luke Kimball. I am with the Pathways UU Church. We're in Hurst, Texas. Hurst is in what's called the Mid-Cities area of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. We're roughly about 6 miles west of the DFW airport. Pronouns, him, he. I don't know all my pronouns. I apologize for that. I am on the board. I'm the treasurer. We're a fairly small church. We have 82 members, but we're growing very quickly, which I'm told is an anomaly in the world of churches and religion. So we've about doubled our size in the last 2 years, which is we're really grateful for. We picked up a Cub Scout troop in the last 14 months, and they've grown from 6 kids up to about 30 kids right now, which is really amazing. Bringing a lot of parents in. The reason I got on this, I'm always interested in learning more about UU, what the UU has to offer, anything to help the church grow and bring resources to the church. We don't have a pastor or a minister. So yeah, I'm just always looking for resources, anything we can do to help the church.
Thank you, Luke. And I think I can safely speak for Cameron and I that we both want to be in a coaching, companioning role with all of you all. We're virtually available and sometimes in a face-to-face context. I see we've had a couple other folks join us. Alyssa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I sure can.
Okay, my name is Alyssa Zazeda. I'm a member of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Dubuque, which is located in Dubuque, Iowa. We're a small fellowship of, I believe, around 45 members, and I just moved here about a month ago, and my previous church was the church in Birmingham, Alabama, that's much bigger. So I saw this webinar and was interested, since it's talking about smaller congregations, and I just wanted to get an idea of different approaches when you're working with a much smaller congregation. So thanks for hosting this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyssa. And for a moment, I saw Macy sign in, and I don't know if Macy's still with us. Hello, Macy, are you here? Maybe Macy had to sign out for a moment. And Dan, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Yay, Dan, how are things in Park Forest? Would you introduce yourself?
I'm Dan Felt. I'm with the Unitarian Universalist Church in Park Forest. I'm the DRE, and we have about 70 members, and probably average about 5 children every week. They're mostly 4th and 5th graders. Got a couple of 6th graders, but that's sort of what our religious education, we call it religious and character education, because we want to try to bring in people that aren't looking for a religious education, but, you know, more of a, how do I live my life better for their kids?
Well said. Thank you, Dan. Great to hear your voice. Are you able to see the PowerPoint? The slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. So is that everyone? Maybe Macy will come back on and join us. So moving forward, I'm going to turn this over to Cameron.
So I'd like to open this up with sort of what we have as a mantra in the faith development world in Unitarian Universalism, and this is this phrase was coined by our dear colleague Connie Goodbread, who's the Southern Region co-lead, and she says that faith development is all we do. Unitarian Universalism is all we teach, and the congregation is the curriculum. As a religious educator of 5 years, that mantra served me really significantly, because I know, you know, a lot of times if you're in a congregational context, especially I can see it more so in a small congregational context where you're still trying to sort of solidify your theological identity, having something as grounding as that, because people will want to come in and do this world religion and teach about this thing and want to do this social justice cause, which may or may not align with the mission and vision of your church. I think this is something really crucial to ask yourself. You know, is this, if you get a proposal of we should do something, is this Unitarian Universalism? Does this fit under the umbrella of Unitarian Universalism? And does this serve the congregation? And so we talk about alignment, right? And it's important in a congregation, especially one that is finding its footing. You want to know what the left hand wants to know what the right hand is doing. And what we really try to champion is curriculum mapping. If you can find a way for your children's religious education program and your adult religious education program and your worship services, if you can find a way to relate those and align those thematically, you're onto something. Because, I mean, what's going to happen? Your parents are going to take their children home, and at the dinner table, they're going to want to discuss what they what they learned in church, because that's where the real faith development happens, right? Like, we can do as much as we can in church, but like children, especially youth, they become Unitarian Universalists at the dinner table. And if you have your adults in your congregation and your children in your congregation, and that they're doing something similarly aligned, that's going to be so vital. So we talk about the three aspects of curriculum, the implicit, the explicit, and the null. So the implicit, which in some ways I think is the most important. A children walks in and they are greeted at the door. They are acknowledged by name. They are incorporated into worship. The implicit curriculum, it is implied that children are welcome at this church. If they are treated in a way where they are seen and not heard, that is the implicit curriculum, that they are not welcome. And I have heard that from UUs before. Children should be seen and not heard. I have heard that coming from a person's mouth, which just breaks my heart, you know? And similarly, the explicit curricula, you have to think about what you're actually teaching. What are the words coming out of, coming from the pulpit? What is being explicitly taught about our theology? And the null curricula, more so what is left out. We relate this all back to, we are curriculum mapping for people from age 0 to 99. We want to think about every stage of development, both cognitively, emotionally, and in terms of faith. So what you have to start thinking about, what do you want your 5-year-old Unitarian Universalist to become? What do you want them to be? How do you want them to embody our faith when they're 60 years old? And the answer is covenant. So I was giving an elevator speech actually just half an hour ago, because when you work in Unitarian Universalism, it's you know, that society we live in, of course, it's people ask you what you do. And doing the work that Nancy and I do, we can't avoid that question. We can't answer that question without avoiding a conversation about religion, which is great. I mean, it gives us the opportunity to evangelize. And one of the first things that I say is that we are not a creedal faith. We are a covenantal faith, which is much harder. It would be one thing if you were in a church and you stood up and said the Nicene Creed every Sunday, you know, we believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, all that is seen is unseen. You talk about alignment, like, right? If we had a Nicene Creed, like if you know, it would be much easier in some ways, right? But, you know, as UUs, I think we want to practice critical thinking and more theological earnesty, and know that, you know, two people can believe two different things, and in some ways, both of them can be right. We can sit in that pluralism and that ambiguity, but it makes cultivating an institution that much harder. And so therefore we have to emphasize covenants. What are the promises that we make to one another? And so finishing that up, for those of us invested in UU faith development, what if we thought of educating our congregants, children, youth, adults, in a way that seeks to manifest hope, love, courage, justice, and joy? It's because, again, we're not creedal. we're covenantal. It's harder to articulate our theology. So what does ground us? We have covenants, and we have things like our 5 smooth stones of liberal religion, which can be, in layman's terms, are hope, love, courage, justice, joy. How do we cultivate that in our people? And if you can even start that conversation in the people in your congregation who are responsible for faith development, you're going to be onto something. Is that you, Nancy, or is that me?
It may be. Let's do it both. So I'm hoping you all are picking up the thread that regardless of your size, there's actually a strength in being a smaller congregation, because the new paradigm, the new shift change in thinking in Unitarian Universalist faith development is a whole church approach where interpersonal relationships are really at the heart. And when Cameron was talking about covenant being at the center, our covenant, in essence, are all of our UU values reflected in our principles. So I'm sure all of you all have already been introducing our principles to our children, to your children, to your youth, to, of course, your adults. But maybe you may not be aware that as a congregation, fellowship, a community that is a member of an association of congregations and communities, our covenant, which is what binds us together, literally is our principles. As Cameron was saying, we are not creedal. So as a whole church, no matter your size, if you're weaving in that consciousness that there is this sense we are going to embody these values, we are going to embody these principles. It's not just a matter of covering content in a classroom. It's not just a matter of making sure that the children get introduced to a particular kind of set way of thinking. The real heart of the matter, and especially this is a strength of smaller congregations, is making sure that those young people are in relationship with trusted adults who will share their stories, share the stories of the congregation, who will bring to them their love of Unitarian Universalism and the fact that there is so much to share, that we do have these amazing resources that can help people go a little bit deeper. So understanding that this is an era of relationships and faith development where we really see that at the heart. And I actually think that's a strength of smaller congregations. So I'm going to move to the next slide, Cameron.
Can I interject real quickly,
Please.
Nancy?
Always.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know it can be frustrating being in a small congregation and not having the same resources as a large congregation, perhaps not being able to replicate some of the programming. And you are in such a unique position because I served a mid-sized congregation as a director of religious education, and we had 70 children and youth, and it took a long time to cultivate relationships with those children and youth, and some I didn't get to know super well. If you have a smaller number, those relationships become much easier to cultivate. And as a matter of fact, I think so many people who grow into our faith come from smaller congregations. I think about my grandmother's congregation growing up, and she was part of the Unity Church, not the UU Church, but the way I was nurtured by individual adults and allowed to participate in worship, and allowed access to certain things that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to do in a larger congregation. I think, I didn't end up becoming a UU, I think helped to cultivate me as a spiritual person and as somebody driven to leadership. So you have a smaller amount of people, but your impact is going to be more far-reaching.
So the goal in terms of faith development, and this can be looked at in terms of human development, and it is essential, no matter if a person's 6 years old or 60, they need to trust the experience. They need to build trust in the community. And that's done in lots of ways, as Cameron has already mentioned, knowing the names of your children and youth, making sure that other adults get to know those children and youth, making sure that you're the advocate for inviting them into those incredible moments in your congregation that they should be a part of, whether that are your celebrations, your service auctions, your worship, all of those pieces. We're not saying that you all need to be together all of the time. When we say that the congregation is the curriculum, it's all of those elements. Every single person needs a time with their same age cohort, but they also absolutely need time in multi-generational context. So a young person needs time with other young people, with a couple of trusted adults helping to be their guide, but they also need to be invited into the life of the congregation in many ways. So building that trust, gaining that sense of fellowship, which means that you are with them and that you're making sure that they're a part of your social justice endeavors, you're making sure that they're a part of your holiday celebrations, and I bet you all are already doing that. The piece that we sort of take for granted, which is really essential to growing young Unitarian Universalists who perhaps stay with our faith, wouldn't that be wonderful, is making sure that they're invited in to our stories, which you do have to go to our content, our Tapestry of Faith resources, if you're looking at Unitarian Universalist identity and the stories of our tradition going back 500 years, but you all know your story of your fellowship, your story of your congregation. It's so important to keep telling that story, to make sure that the children are invited to even retell the story. There's a marvelous program called Spirit Play, which again, many of our smaller congregations aren't necessarily able to afford. It is a Montessori model, but maybe in a cluster of congregations. But the reason I mentioned Spirit Play is that if you go to the Spirit Play resource, which is at the uua.org website, and if you sign up for it, there's a huge body of stories, simply stories of our UU identity that are so important to weave into a story for all ages, an RE classroom setting, again, a milestone moment. But knowing the stories after you have built trust, and making sure there's this core sense of fellowship, making sure that that repertoire of stories are shared, and then speaking from your own heart. There's nothing more powerful, no matter if you're serving on a board or if you're serving as a treasurer or if you're actually the person managing and running the program. Share why Unitarian Universalism is important to you. Share why it's important to you and why you take joy in the living of our young people, to take joy in their company. Those first-person narratives are hugely important to making a young person's heart open up to the experience. And then a piece that we're going to mention now, but get onto a little bit later in the slides, it's really essential, and this is a strength, again, of smaller congregations. You may not be aware that you have a liturgical year, but you do. The liturgy, of course, comes from the Christian tradition, but what we mean by liturgy is that there are stories and anchor moments and anchor experiences throughout the calendar year. We'll be showing some examples of things that I bet you already are doing, from the water ceremony, the in-gathering service often happens in September, to other sorts of cyclical liturgical pieces like pagan celebrations, the solstice celebrations, perhaps doing guest at your table. I'll be talking more about that. But if you have this map of your year and knowing the stories that fit with that liturgical map, it really then becomes a whole church experience. So you're at a time of changing paradigms and changing understanding of how faith development takes place. I know some of you have been serving over time, and perhaps were introduced to what we call the pillar model of religious education. We had an understanding that there were core pillars. Those pillars were often including our Unitarian Universalist identity, social justice, world religions, and of course our Judeo-Christian heritage. our approach was, and I've been a religious educator for a long time, and this is the model that I used when I served my home congregation, was that there was core content that we wanted to make sure that every child and youth received. Content, core competencies, knowledge that we wanted to impart to make sure that they had. So we approached this very much as a school. We're now under a keen awareness that there is something more there. And the more there is that families do not want a classroom setting in a congregational context. Families want their children to be encouraged to grow, to again have a greater sense of identity, be a part of the fellowship, be a part of the whole experience. But necessarily recreating a sort of Sunday school model is not serving us well now. Religious education enrollment numbers have radically declined over the last decade. And the reason being, we've kept a separate sense of where faith development is happening. We have this idea in a silo approach that faith development and religious education are happening over there in a classroom, where adults had to kind of carry the responsibility of being teachers as opposed to guides or someone sharing of their own journey in Unitarian Universalism and having that experience with that young person, introducing them to ideas, again, understanding our sources. We still avow and affirm knowledge from the world's religions. Nothing has changed in how we honor that information, but the delivery of that content is quite different now in terms of we realize a classroom structure will not serve us well going into the future. So there was a piece written by a colleague of ours, Kim Sweeney, called The Death of Sunday School. And this has now been 3 years ago, and you may or may not have heard of it, but it had a huge impact on many UU congregations. And the benediction, in essence, it's a very big piece, but it's important that you understand that this document exists and that it's made a big impact. But the benediction is that our families need to be empowered. Our families need to be included into the life of the congregation. They need to be given resources and encouragement because parents are our primary religious educators. And so having that sense of a whole church where families are affirmed is the real core content in the Death of Sunday School. So stepping a little bit further or going a little bit further with that, another one of our colleagues, Karen Bellavance Grace, created something called Full Week Faith. And we will be sending this PowerPoint to you, so you'll get all these links. And if you have not encountered some of this before. But Karen is a great accompanied piece to accompany this idea of breaking down the sort of classroom structure solely as being the experience for faith development to be happening. So Full Week Faith is a way to involve the whole community, to empower families, and we've given a couple examples in upcoming slides of what that looks like in Full Week Faith. But the core piece, folks, if you get anything from tonight, and again, it's a singular strength of our smaller congregations of having a whole church approach where you understand that the life of your congregation is really reflected in, as Cameron was saying, having this sense of holy curiosity that there's something you want to learn together, how to create more hope in the world, more love, more courage, more justice, more joy, but also how you can make sure that you are deepening your interpersonal relationships, that you're thinking about themes. So if you go to Soul Matters, which is an amazing resource, which there is a small yearly fee, you will see a lot of templates for multi-age groupings, specifically for smaller congregations. Some of you shared only will have maybe 2 or 4 kids on a Sunday. They may be in 5th grade, or they may be in middle school, or they may be, in kindergarten. But the beauty of these templates that you can get through Soul Matters and other resources that we'll be showing you is that you can create a multi-age experience for them. Again, your core piece should be someone helping with that group of children, that multi-age group, should be helping and focusing on building relationships and not necessarily just covering content. This is the example of Full Week Faith, and this is a great idea as well as an experience for the congregation. It's called The Blessing of the Backpacks. There's 2 resource links here, which give you a step-by-step or a process to actually have this blessing of the backpack. It could be a part of your liturgical year, which means your yearly calendar. You could build up the enthusiasm for it in the summer, begin to communicate that this will happen. It could be an outdoor experience or an indoor experience. It could be for all stages of learners, from folks who are returning to college to someone starting kindergarten. But it's a ritual, and it's a beautiful ritual, which says that as Unitarian Universalists, we highly esteem learning. We consider ourselves lifelong learners. So do check out Full Week Faith. And then, as I mentioned, in theme-based ministry, there's a ton of resources out there. Again, many of them are tailored for smaller congregations, and these are 3 links. Soul Matters is an independent group. It's not through our National Lifespan Faith Development folk, but they are Unitarian Universalist, and again, they charge a small fee, but it is an abundant resource for you. The other 2 links here do come from our Lifespan leaders, and they are all available for free on our uua.org website. So in terms of small group ministry, and some people kind of joke of like, oh my gosh, I'm pitching this to a small congregation. You're already doing small group ministry, but here's the strength that you have. You most likely know everyone in your fellowship or congregation, and that's a strength. But at the same time, are there opportunities in a multi-age context for 6 to 8 people, because a small group ministry experience is really ideally about 6 to 8 people, for them to go a little bit deeper with one another. And you may have already done this in covenant circles or chalice circles for adults, but we would like you to consider doing this with youth and with children. And there are already, again, templates created on the way to do this. The beauty of small group ministry, which hits all of the marks of this new paradigm, it's a whole church approach, but it's a more intimate building of interpersonal relationships. It is going deeper with our covenant at center. And again, when we say covenant, we're talking about our UU values, which again is our principles. So it goes deeper in reflecting on those things. The emphasis is on relationships as opposed to teaching. It allows for significant time where the children and youth actually know, and they get to know the process of a small group ministry model, which will serve them their whole life. There's a resource at the end that we'll share of how family circles can also follow this small group ministry model. It also simplifies the amount of material presented to children, because you're not having this sense as a teacher or a leader where you're carrying the weight of all this core content that you have to impart in this 45 minutes. You're actually making sure that there's a message linking to that value or that idea. It's not so much covering all of the content. It also eliminates a lot of teacher preparation time, because again, there is a flow, there is a centering, there is a time where we gather in, there is a chalice lighting, there's a question for reflection, which can be a multi-age question for someone as young as 5 as up to, older. And then we're making sure that there's a focus on having a flow to it. So there's already an understanding of what happens within, and it's usually at least a 30-minute session. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. But even though you're serving in or you're a member of a smaller congregation, we would very much like you to consider the small group ministry model. Highlighting again small group ministry, and Cameron, you can chime in on any of this. The focus is making sure that children and youth feel a part of a community. And the beauty of a small group ministry model, they're getting to go deeper with a handful of trusted adults. They're really getting to know one another. And that bonding, studies have shown that if young people have at least a minimum of 6 relationships with trusted adults in the congregation, from having someone in the classroom as a trusted adult to having a mentor, perhaps in a coming of age program, getting to know if you have a minister, or getting to know board members, or getting to know your elders. If they have at least 6 relationships, they are likely to remain in Unitarian Universalism. Their likelihood of remaining does not mean that they went through 12 years of RE classes. That's not getting them to stick in the faith. What's getting them to stick is if when they show up on a Sunday morning, and again, a strength of a smaller congregation, you all actually, your faces light up with joy, because you could say, oh my gosh, you're here. Thank you so much for making sure that you're here. We miss seeing you, or whatever that is. You're getting to know them. You're taking delight in the fact that they're a part of your community, regardless of their age. They're also learning to develop their own spirituality, which is another big shift change in Unitarian Universalist faith development, the importance of spiritual practices and group spiritual practices. It also helps them in this small group ministry model to examine and explore what's happening in their actual lives and how it fits into our values. So,
also add that
please.
really and truly, any kind of didactic teaching, any curricular material, any theological material that is offered in the RE classroom, it's not going to go over if there's not at least first a foundational relationship between the adult and the child or youth that the interaction is occurring with.
So this is you, Cameron. We can share it or you can take a point on it, but
yeah, so we talk about the liturgical year, and societies, communities were grounded in tradition. And, I've heard people in UU congregations say something along the lines of, well, tradition's just peer pressure from dead guys, which on the one hand is pretty funny. On the other hand, I think if we reject tradition and the notion of tradition altogether, we're not going to create anything sustainable. We have to have something in which we find commonality in, especially on an intergenerational level. Children learn through ritual. Children learn through repetition. And so much of that is in how we can establish our traditions. So we don't offer a setting where kids go up and take communion on a weekly basis. Kids go up and kids kneel before the altar on a weekly basis. Kids go through confessional. But we need to, how can we replicate that in a way that's true to our theology? And to me, I think we establish some kind of liturgical year. There's something that every year you look forward to taking part with in your family. Easter service, I think, resonates with so many of us who may not have, who may have had UU and non-UU experiences, even if we don't believe in the literal resurrection, right? Like there's something about being with your family, having an Easter egg hunt, all of the bright colors and the bells and whistles. How can we replicate that in our congregations? And establishing a liturgical year is a chance to create those opportunities for your kids, your youth, your families to take part in. And these are your sort of your go-tos, your standards, if you will, of things we can do in establishing a liturgical year. A water ceremony is, I think, just it's wonderful, as this blessing of the backpacks, which Nancy talked about earlier. Something holidays, winter solstice can be really cool. I personally, I don't shy away. I want to offer a nativity pageant in a UU setting. Again, like we're not professing the virgin birth as something literal, but this notion of every day a child is born is a miracle. And that can be told through the lens of the nativity story. That's a beautiful thing that we can celebrate in our tradition. Child dedications, flower communion, which we'll get into in a little bit. There's so many things that you can establish a tradition and a ritual within your congregation. So flower communion. This is also and Nancy talked about spirit play earlier. This is one of my favorite spirit play stories. So Norbert Čapek, and his flower communion, something that was established in Czechoslovakia nearly 100 years ago. So people, they bring a flower of their choice, and you can get adults and children in the congregation. Children often will wait at the front of the sanctuary, and each person will place a flower in the vase. And what it does is it signifies their own free will and how they can be joined with others. And I think that's such a beautiful representation of the pluralism in our church. We can have an orchid next to a rose, and make this beautiful bouquet. We don't all have to be roses. We don't all have to be a bouquet of orchids. We can bring our own elements into this this beautiful bouquet of a community. And if you have a spirit play program, or if you look up, and we can provide these resources probably here towards the end of the webinar. But to tell the spirit play story in advance of the flower communion, I think could go over really powerfully. I see a question. It was, what is guest at your table? Nancy, do you want to?
Yeah.
And better.
And one of the reasons this list, when we were thinking about this, we're hoping that many of these things you already do. So we're using sort of an appreciative inquiry lens of, oh my gosh, we're already doing that. But reframing the understanding of how these become anchors for having a whole church approach, where faith development is all that you're doing by making sure that children and youth are involved in all of these milestones. So Guest at Your Table is a perfect thing for young people. Often it's around Halloween. Our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee has asked our congregations to, with parents or with trusted adults working with the youth, to go out and instead of collecting candy around Halloween, to collect money to then go to those community partners across the world who are truly in need. And the thing about it is that it's a little box that you sign up for. You can go online with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, UUSC, and you can get these items. But the reason we include it in the liturgical year flow is that it happens often every October, so it's an annual thing you can plan on, but then make it an important part of the life of the congregation. Build it up for the whole month. Perhaps have a time where everybody, you've heard of trunk or treat, where everybody will fill a parking lot like at a congregation, and the kids will come in their costumes and actually go car to car. You could also include the Guest at Your Table fundraising, where they're also collecting money. Include them in the next service. Have them bring their boxes forward. Make it something where they are blessed and affirmed by thinking of this. Tell the story of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and how we would not have a chalice symbol without it. And if you don't know that story, do some Googling and discover the story of Hans Deutsch, who helped design the chalice because of the work that the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee was doing early on during World War II. So make all those links. So there's a story in our tradition. Here's an activity that could involve young people, children, as well as adults, and then make it a part of the life of the congregation. And when you send it in, make it a celebratory thing. So that's Guest at Your Table.
So water communion. I love water as a symbol, as a holy symbol, because it is infinite. The water that we drink is the same water that gave birth to life on this earth millions of years ago. It's recycled. It's malleable. And I think there is some sense of constancy to it, right? But it evaporates, it freezes, it changes, it's combined. I see so many similarities in the nature of how water works, in how we view the divine in Unitarian Universalism. This infinite source that is constant yet is also ever changing. And so that's the beauty I see in water communion. So you have usually it's in the fall at the beginning of the school year or the church year, August, end of August, early September, and people will bring vessels of water from someplace special, often a place they've been this summer. Our thing, we used to take coming of age trips to Boston. We'd all get little vessels of water from Walden Pond. And I thought it was really cool because you had water from Walden Pond. You had in so many ways, a Unitarian holy site for us that would be combined with the rest of the water that the congregants brought back. And you'd put it all together and then you'd boil it. And then that would be the UU holy water, and that would be the church's water. And that water would be used in the water communion the following year. So just this same water that you could say Henry David Thoreau swam in, right? And even more so the same water that probably dinosaurs drank out of. I think that's just so miraculous without any elements of supernatural that make water communion so special to me. Most of y'all are probably at least familiar with water communion, but if not, here's some resources to tell you about it. And if your congregation doesn't do it already, I so encourage it because it's really powerful.
And again, this may be something you're thinking, we already do it, as Cameron just said, but here's the shift change in thinking. Make it a whole church experience for the whole year. The whole year you're thinking about it. Perhaps in April, you go and a group of you go help to clean up a riverbed because it is Earth Day and Earth Month that we celebrate our 7th principle. Make sure you're saving some water for the water communion. Make a place in the congregation, a little part of a closet, where people can maybe even bring their water as you collect it. Have it in, again, your children's chapels or your multi-age settings where they're thinking about, well, my gosh, I want to conserve water. I'm thinking about one of the most moving stories I heard from a religious educator in Flint, Michigan, where their water communion, oh my gosh, they were having to still live on many of them, bottled water. So this became a linkage with our call to justice as well as our connectedness and how precious this is, and we don't take it for granted. I pray that you not have this as a travel log. If people are just getting up and saying, I've been to the Caribbean, I've been to so on and so forth, I mean, that's sweet and tender, but put some thought into it. Have a leader up front where you can actually frame this broader context, as Cameron was saying, of the deep, amazing qualities of water, but also as this sort of binding for the whole year. Many congregations use this water for their child dedications. Many congregations will recess from the water ceremony out into perhaps an area around your congregation where part of the water is put back into the water that is there in your groundwater, and then part of it is consciously saved. So what I'm saying to you all, what we're saying to you all, again, with this liturgical flow, think of a way for this is a storytelling opportunity, a ritual that you all can be thinking about all year to involve all the kids. And this one's you too, Cameron.
So this is an example of how water communion can be incorporated into a multi-generational curriculum map. So you have the water communion in worship, and then what would happen if somehow you tied that into the classes you offered for both kids and adults? So So, for example, Gather the Spirit is I believe, a multi-generational curriculum through Tapestry that can be found at the UUA through Tapestry of Faith, and it talks about water. It talks about how water is a justice issue, water as a scientific element, and it talks about water as something that can be sacred. So some of y'all might have followed what happened in Standing Rock a year or two ago. I guess it would have been 3 years ago now. Yeah. When the pipeline, which unfortunately was eventually built onto the Standing Rock Reservation, one of the chants the protesters would often say was "Water is life, water is life," because water is our sustaining life force. So we had the congregation I served at that time. We had a special service really honoring Indigenous rights and really prayerfully focused on how Indigenous peoples of North Dakota and really all over the country, because all reservations are being threatened in some capacity by colonialism and have always been. But we were really focused on how that was being threatened at Standing Rock. If you can find a way to tie, I guess where I'm going with this is if you can find a way to tie justice issues like this of how we live our UU values out in the world with what we do in a service like the water ceremony, that can be an example of curriculum mapping, right? Because people are making connections there.
And weaving it into your story and weaving it into the greater story. We have a thriving UU congregation up in Bismarck, Mandan, North Dakota, who are literally working closely with these water protectors. So this is not a random aside. This is not a group over there. This is a part of our story and how we are, so there's just lots of ways to do this. And that is a small congregation that is strong in spirit. So they are with you in that regard. So what we're describing, go ahead. Did someone want to ask something or say something? So what we're describing, and there is an ease of having a particularity, as I mentioned when I first was a religious educator, when I, with other leaders in my congregation, created a curriculum map, it was exactly like creating a syllabus for a course. It was literally, I know exactly the content we're to cover, these are the sessions to cover. It was very, very technical. We are not saying tonight that all of that content is for naught. The content remains important. It's the delivery and the approach and what we're trying to embody. So the whole description of a whole community, one of the most beautiful descriptions, which is really something that I remain very focused on in my work in faith development, comes from the vision statement for the Tapestry of Faith curricula series. And it was created now almost 12 years ago. But this is a description, and I use it often in congregations when I'm doing consultations. So if we imagined that maybe 20 years ago, if we had said, what is our faith development vision? We would have said, we want the kids to know about all the world's religions. We want them to know about X, Y, and Z. Instead, when Tapestry of Faith was being created, this description of a community really became the guiding focus. We want to make sure that a child, an adolescent, a youth, an emerging adult, a young adult, an adult, a senior, know that they are lovable beings of infinite worth, imbued with the powers of the soul, obligated in a faith response, obligated to use their gifts, talents, and potentials in the service of life. We want them to affirm, we want them to know that prophecy is not sealed. We are a living tradition. We are inviting young people to help us change how we understand ourselves. We want them to know when we share our stories, And be sure to include your own fellowship stories and to name the elders, to name the founders, to name why civil rights was important to them, or environmental justice, or whatever those anchor stories are in your particular context. Make sure that when you share those stories with your young people, describe how this fits within the entire vision of Unitarian Universalism, but invite them to be change makers in these stories. Know the names of some of the younger people in our movement. Know the name of Zach Walls, a young man from Iowa City, Iowa, who grew up in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, who took on the Boy Scouts, who literally changed how the Boy Scouts understand the role of leaders and whether or not they can have different sexual orientations, and was successful. This idea came to him as a teenager. He grew up in our movement. He somehow knew, in a beloved context in a community, his ideas had merit, that he had a capacity to change things in a big way, and he understood how it fit into his Unitarian Universalist identity. That's just one example. So if they understand that they're a part of a community of faith that has real value and provides real resources for living, this is not just an abstraction. It's so important as trusted adults that you share with young people why this feels like a life-saving faith to you. I'm not asking you to make a testimony, but I'm asking you to say that, oh my gosh, just spending time on a Sunday morning with these dear souls strengthens me to face the rest of the week. It fills me up with a sense of joy to know the stories of what's happening to those here, and to actually be a part of their celebrations or even their sorrows and their challenges. We also help our young people understand, because this is not a random aside either, because everything we're doing when we talk about a whole church or a whole earth approach weaves into a systems thinking, and that systems thinking is our seventh principle, that everything is connected. If we could simply impart to our young people, and again in these smaller multi-age contexts that you all do every Sunday or every Wednesday night, if you simply say to them, if you receive, you contribute. That is applicable to everything. If they grow up with this humane understanding that they are charged as a Unitarian Universalist to thoughtfully consume, to think about where that water is coming from, to think about why recycling isn't just a sort of a busy activity, that it helps them be connected to absolutely our entire context of diversity, justice, and compassion. The rest of this vision statement, and I would encourage you all, and you'll see the link when I send you the PowerPoint, to print this out, perhaps even reflect on it in a worship service, hand it out to anyone who's spending time with your kids, use it at a board retreat and say, how do we see ourselves in this description of a community? Are we embodying some of these elements? Such as, do you understand yourself to be moral agents capable of making a difference in the lives of other people? That does not mean rescuing, fixing, or saving those who are treated unfairly due to their identity, but it means being with, in support of, welcoming those who are treated unfairly due to their identity in our communities, fully seeing them, not asking them to translate who they are so that they will fit, but making sure that you're serving a community that truly does have open arms and embraces all. Absolutely understanding that everyone needs, and this was really groundbreaking when this came out again 12 years ago. So I've been a religious educator for 20 plus years, and I'd never seen this in any UU articulation of religious education. So simple, but recognizing the need for community and the affirming the importance of families. This is at the time when a lot of discussion around family ministry began to take place, affirming that these interpersonal relationships are the measure of our robust health in our smaller communities and in our mid-size and larger. If we could measure our success by those depth of relationships and not the head count, then we have grown in our consciousness about a whole church approach. And then, please, 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 even if you react to the word spirituality, we're not asking you to be spiritual, but we're asking you to spend time with your children and youth in those practices that help them get a little bit of peace in a world that's full of violence, and chaos. If you are someone that prays, if you're someone that loves to garden to get yourself a little bit of peace, if you're someone that loves to cook and you do this in a holy kind of way of making of bread, or if you're someone that does sitting meditation, make sure that some of those multi-age groupings are adults, trusted adults, sharing what those spiritual practices are in their life that make a difference, and then find a way. So programmatically, we're not asking you to do a lot in this webinar, but find a way to embody those in a group setting. If journaling is something that some of you all do, invite your teens to be a part of a journaling experience. If contemplative reflection is something that some of your leaders do, invite, again, your children and your youth. They are capable of actually sitting quietly and understanding the importance of deep breathing and being mindful. So all of this is a part of the tapestry of faith vision statement. And we're going to have lots of good time for questions and engagement. We've covered a lot of material. So I'm wondering, what are some of the central stories and rituals that ground people of all ages in your context? What's something that you often are sharing or lifting up? Have any of you all had any kind of milestone moments lately or anything like that? This is not a test. This is just a time for sharing. So I'm going to put you on the spot. So Luke, you shared that you're at Pathways, and you began to tell us a little bit about the genesis of Pathways. How often do you all talk about that story with the younger people and make them understand that perhaps there was a sense of beloved community or something more than we just want to be a group of people together? Oh, you need to unmute. Thanks.
It's interesting you bring that up. 2 Sundays ago, we had our, say, 10th anniversary. So we had a bunch of speakers come up and talk about the history of Pathways Church, because we've only been in existence for 10 years. We just about went out of existence, I'll say 5 years ago, due to, I don't know, poor management, poor membership, whatever you want to call it. But we've revived and we're growing quite a bit right now. Anyhow, out of this presentation, we do most of the things that you had suggested in terms of rituals. The one thing I wrote down that I thought would be interesting to add would be the blessing of the backpacks. We've never done that, and I think it's a pretty cool thing. The other thing would be the water communion. Sometimes that does turn into this travel log of people just where they've been, but it's worth putting some thought into it. I ended up grabbing some water from a glacier this summer that I brought and contributed, and I'm in the concrete business. I say that, but we're basically making concrete much more efficiently. We just hit the 100 million pounds of CO2 avoided in the environment about a month ago with my company. So I'm in the environmental side of the business, and I just wanted to reinforce with people these glaciers are here, but they're going away very quickly. If you haven't seen one, get out to see one before they're gone, because they probably won't be around for my grandkids. Anyhow, the other thing that I was going to mention to all of you, I know it's a small group, but that Cub Scout group that we started, because, you know, scouting is more inclusive. I think they're a good fit with the UU, especially since the Church of the Latter-day Saints has dropped them as a sponsoring church. It just fit in really well. And our kids, again, I'm really pleased with the way that pack has grown. With the way it's brought in people into the church. Our kids are highly motivated. They set a goal of selling, I'm going to get the number wrong, about $8,000 worth of popcorn. They've sold almost $20,000 worth of popcorn, wow, which kind of helps fund their activities for the year. So anyhow, that's about all I have to say. I'm just rambling on at this point.
No, those are great. And so here's the stretch. So with your Cub Scout group that's meeting at the church, Google, yep, Zach Walls, show them some videos. Because I'm serious.
I wrote that down, his name.
Yeah.
Because I'd never seen that before. I've never heard his name.
He testified before. I mean, there's a lot of videos out there. And he talks about the importance that his 2 moms that deserve the fair and equal treatment, you know. And again, he grew up in the Iowa City Church and UU. And so them knowing that, and I'm blanking, and Cameron, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but back in the 60s, I believe, and it was in Ohio. A youth was the one who took on making sure that prayer was not required in schools, so for separation of church and state. And I'm going to do my own sort of Googling after this. But it's been our young people, our knowing those stories is so important, and I'm bungling knowing that story. The other thing about the water piece, you know, again, I'm asking you all to think about this as a whole church year. If you engage a few young people, and you don't want to use the term water protector lightly, because it is a sacred term, and it's important, as Cameron was saying, to understand our indigenous peoples and how they're truly, I mean, putting their lives on the line to be water protectors. But if you use that story and then actually say, we want you to help us be protective of water here. How are we using water in this congregation? And then sharing about your work in the concrete business. And you see where that all links with our seventh. So it's not just here's this one ceremony or here's this one ritual, but you're thinking about it for the year. So that's where we're hoping to encourage. So how about some others? Are there any central stories or rituals or things that ground you all?
So I want to interject real fast. I posted a video of Zach Wall's. So if you can find a way to connect that work that you're doing with Unitarian Universalism, like what? And I mean that's the perfect way to do it, because he's not only representing the Scouts, but he's representing Unitarian Universalism, and he's really gone on to do some great things. I think he ran for office at one point.
I think so too.
I need to follow up on that. But also, Luke, I just want to add, I don't know if you saw in the chat, but I live in Fort Worth. So if you ever want to have lunch, please just send me an email or something.
All right, that sounds good. Hey, and I did Google Zach Walls, and he is now a senator from Iowa.
Oh,
I find that hard to believe.
my gosh. Thank you. I love knowing that now. And I go through Iowa frequently. Oh, that's thrilling. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
I'm kind of shocked it's Iowa, but yeah, he's Iowa. Yeah,
and who knows if he
Holy
still
shit.
identifies as UU, but he did grow up in UU faith development. I do know that for sure. So let's hope that some of those ideas led him into
I
the...
believe he does still identify as UU. I heard something through the grapevine. Like, don't quote me on it, but yeah, I think he led a workshop at GA probably sometime in 5 years.
So how about some of you all? Have you had perhaps invited some of your founding members to come to one of your multi-age RE groupings and perhaps talk about why this was important to them? I was just in Lima, Ohio, and met with a small group, very small congregation, who there were still people there who remembered meeting with Monroe Husbands, the founder of the fellowship movement, who was sort of like the Johnny Appleseed through the Midwest and beyond in creating fellowships. And I said to them, have your kids heard that story where you met the person who came from Boston, who actually put an ad in your local paper that says, do you want a place where reason and religion meet, and that narrative and how they're still here after so many years? Anything like that? Any kind of anchoring stories, or do you ever invite your elders to meet with your young people? Anybody?
This is Susan. We last year celebrated our 15th anniversary. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely, Susan.
Okay. And we did have the founding members tell about the history of why they started this church 15 years ago and how they got started and how much work went into it and what growth they've seen in those 15 years. So it was powerful for all of us, the children, the youth, and the adults. Everybody, appreciated hearing that. And we had visitors too who just came for this special event. And so it was a marvelous sharing of that history and what that meant to everyone.
Wonderful. And then here's the stretching part. For those of you all spending time with the kids who perhaps heard some of those stories, invite them to think about, just as an imagining, just as a wondering, what will be perhaps the stories you may be telling down the road, because that invites them to remain in our movement and invites them to remain in the faith. What will be that story that's important? I shared at a recent training that the founders of my home congregation made sure, because they love the environment so much, to plant every indigenous tree from Kentucky. I live in Lexington, Kentucky. So now those elders, because I still am in touch and, meet with the DRE and so on and so forth, they now do a tour of the grounds with the newer kids saying, I remember planting this tree and it has this significance. And other elders talk about, I can remember when I used to be able to jump over this tree and it's now this huge coffee tree or whatever. But the fact that they weave in the fact that the love of the environment, it was so important to them, their love of Kentucky, the importance of honoring and understanding our ecodiversity and our biological diversity. I mean, they use it as this springboard, but it's this beautiful, tender sharing across the ages. And I'm sure you all have got some stories like that. Anybody else?
I'd also just like to share about our water communion, if that's okay.
Please.
Every year, our water communion has been kind of the travelogue scenario, and I've always been uncomfortable with it because I could see the disparity in the congregation of people who did international travels and came back with waters from all these amazing trips, and other people who brought, water from their faucet, which is equally as valuable and important to all our lives, of course. But I just felt that, I don't know, there was really something missing. So this year, I was asked to help with a service around the time of water communion. I said, could I incorporate it? Because we use the Touchstones theme curriculum.
Oh, great.
And the theme for September was covenant. Well, last June, a year ago June, we adopted a covenant that our congregation had written together. And so we had gotten back to it periodically throughout the year, but we thought this needs to be a yearly ritual where we go back to our covenant and reaffirm it with each other. And so we used our water ceremony as that everyone read a part of the covenant, a line out of the covenant, and then put a little water into what we labeled as our sacred water bowl that we're going to keep throughout the year. And it was the blending of our promise to each other. And so the water in the bowl symbolized this big promise that the whole congregation had made to each other, and it was all blended together. But I love some of the ideas I was hearing about making that a year-long theme. Like I said, when we did it as a travelogue kind of thing, we never used the water really for anything else, and we bless this water with a sacred water blessing, and I just want it to be more. So I appreciated all those ideas that I heard, and now my mind is just whirling on all different ways to use the idea of water as this really sacred thing in all of our lives. And, so thanks. I'm feeling excited.
Absolutely. And I see now that I'm moving the box around that I didn't welcome Macy. Hi, Macy.
Hey.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Macy. I had to jump in a few minutes late as I was arriving here to the fellowship where I'm at. We have childcare here tonight, so they're across the hall from me.
And where is your fellowship?
Mankato, Minnesota.
Oh, wonderful. Gorgeous country. Well, is there anything, are you fairly new serving in that capacity? What's your role at the fellowship?
So I'm the Director of Children's Faith Development, essentially the DRE, as many people call it. It's been about 2 months since I started, so I'm still super fresh. I'd been involved in the UU just volunteering. We did host food nap bombs here. They're shifting it to just call it Sunday supper now. It's kind of shifted. I'd attended the Buddhist meditation nights, and we're a pretty small congregation. We usually have around a dozen to 15 kids show up so far that I've been here. A couple times it was a smaller group, and we've got about a dozen youth involved. So it's a good lively group. I think it's a good number for it to be me and another facilitator helping usually. Some of the more meaningful things we've done as far as rituals for me so far I thought were I really appreciate that we did the International Day of Peace and we gathered around our peaceful outside this fall. And it actually aligned with the Mikado Wachipi powwow. So we were honoring that. And I don't know if you all are familiar with the history of the area, but there's a past here where there was 38 Indigenous people hung. So, you know, it's really important for us to honor that.
Absolutely.
And the connection to the land that they hold so sacred. So that was really special for me. And I think the kids I think the youth especially, and some of the kids that hit home for them. And we also did the water communion this fall. And actually this week we have the bread communion coming up. So
wonderful. What do you all hope to do with the bread communion?
we're sharing the marvelous love story from the Soul Matters.
Wonderful.
That'll be our story. And we're gonna use some acting out with that part, and then we're gonna have the kids set the table together too, just like it talks about in Soul Matters, just shifting some of the questions a little bit and simplifying it in a way. So, and it'll be an all generation service, so we'll keep the kids with us in the whole service this week.
Well, you might be relatively new, but you're on the right track, and you're certainly finding the right resources. And Cameron and I are happy to be a resource as well to you. We did a webinar series earlier in September, specifically for newer folks serving, that we'd be happy to share with you. But know that we're here for you. But so this, oh, good. We still have time for questions and wonderings. And actually, I think, Cameron, I asked you to take point on this one, if you don't mind, or we could do it together. Or I could just spiel away. We could chime in together.
Keep going. You
I'll
do your
spiel away. That's not even a term. So, hey, you all, some of you have discovered the theme-based ministry approaches, whether that's through Soul Matters, which again is a subscription service, but once you pay that small annual fee, you get abundance. It's huge, the amount of resources that you get with that. Again, with Full Week Faith, there is no charge for that. The multi-generational, I think there's now 4 multi-generational series through Tapestry of Faith. Those are all free. One is all about water, one is all about trees. But again, this can be done in small groupings for just a portion of it. But here's another resource that you may not know about. So I'm a member of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, as well as being a member of my home congregation, but I'm on the road so much and they do such important work. They have incredible RE resources specifically designed for smaller groupings. Again, this is often for groups of UUs who can't be in a larger congregation. So you just have to donate a small amount, but I would encourage you to think about maybe even donating a little bit more, but you can access all of their resources at Quest for Meaning. They actually also have online live worship services, which, especially if you only have a couple of teens and you're struggling, maybe actually get together with them with a couple of trusted adults and take part in one of these virtual live streaming Church of the Larger Fellowship worship services. They're very contemporary in their focus. They often have emerging adults as leaders. They're really wonderful. Also, the family circle training. So Sheila Shu is one of the content creators for Soul Matters and does a lot of that design. She also continues to serve as the Director of Religious Education at a large church, the Rochester UU Church in Rochester, New York. I was at a training with her where she introduced this model called family circle training. So again, in that whole church approach of making sure you're understanding the importance of the paradigm shift of the death of Sunday school, we want to affirm, include, and really embrace and empower our families to really feel like they are treasures, and that we want to strengthen the work that they do and the loving work that they do with their families. The family circle training basically is a small group ministry model, a restorative justice model that can be used with a family on a regular basis to heighten their sense of beloved communication with one another. And so it's a template. I'm actually holding it in my hand. And if you do not want to reach out to Sheila, I could scan this and send it to you all. But it's an actual guide that you could give your families, or maybe even try it in the congregation. It gives you the flow of how to have difficult conversations, but there is a centering, there's a time to check in. And this is really, and she does this every week with her own family. She talks about the history of restorative justice circles and using that in a more intimate circle process of reaching consensus on an important decision. She talks about an example that they always struggled with how they could find a vacation. They lived on very little money, and so how could they come up with family vacation? So they'd have a family circle to talk about their vacation plans and to come to consensus. And then they have celebrations together using this model. So there's some great resources out there. Were there any other resources or ideas or questions that you all would like to bring up now in our last about 8 minutes together? And if you put something in the chat, I'm missing the chat. So here's a simple idea. Just cut me off if a question comes up in your mind. Do you all feel confident that all of the adults know the names of the young people in your community? So I'm taking that silence. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, yes, I am confident of that. That's
Hey.
My congregation has always been, I'm so pleased with this because I am a retired teacher, and knowing children's names and a little about them is critical for relationship. But I just love the way my congregation welcomes children. And in fact, sometimes we have been in mixed groups where there's other people, and my congregation, when they hear children talking and making a little noise at the back of the room or something, they turn around and smile. And other people turn around and kind of frown, why are those children here and making noise, So I love that my congregation is really welcoming to children. And so whenever we've had adult leaders, I've never worried about that. The children don't know who they are because they are together with us so much that there's a real comfort level.
Oh, that's inspiring. That's inspiring, Susan.
In my congregation.
And the flip-flop of that, if you're not confident that the adults know the children, the same is true of, are you the advocate in your system for making sure that your children and youth, your adolescents, have opportunities to get to know the adults? Look for those opportunities. If there's always something that has only been adult only, stretch it a bit, even if it isn't always a multi-gen context. Some of our bigger events, the bigger things that happen in the life of the fellowship, whether it's 80 people or 40 people, they often forget to include the kids, like a service auction or a fun celebration night or something like that. Any other ideas or questions anyone would like to share?
One of the things that we do at our church is that the chalice lighting is done by a child, and that child is introduced to the congregation.
Lovely.
When they do that.
That's wonderful. And then, again, my thing tonight is stretching. So you're inviting a child who is being introduced to the congregation. Super good, super good. Then for those kids who have been the chalice lighters, perhaps even have a session with them at the end of the month. What did that feel like? What did it represent? What does the chalice mean to us? And then even sharing perhaps in the larger community of why this is a living tradition embodied by this flickering flame, so stretch it a bit. It's wonderful that you all include them. It's wonderful you invite them. It's wonderful they're introduced, but connect it somehow to our values and our ideas. Thanks, Dan. Anybody?
Yeah, that would be good. One of the things that we do is they light their chalice in the classroom. So that would be a good time for us to reincorporate everything into those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially in the Chicagoland area, there are so many. I grew up in Skokie, if you know Skokie, Dan. And so I was the only Protestant kid for 5 miles. It was all Jews and it was wonderful. But I heard their stories and I began to understand the horrors that many of them had lived through. And so having our kids being aware that that chalice was that light, that symbol on those trucks during the Nazi time in Europe, where they actually could think perhaps there was someone being saved or rescued there. Not that we're the saviors, but, you know, connecting those dots, knowing the stories in your context as well. Anybody else? Or comments, anybody?
We do the child dedications here. I know one just took place this last week, and another thing I was gonna mention was actually slipping my mind. Yeah, I can't remember what else I was gonna say.
So Macy, you may not have been in the session when we were thinking about saving some water from that water ingathering time to use for child dedications. Are you aware that perhaps that might happen, or?
I'm not certain.
An idea to consider.
I think they might have done it last year. I think it was mentioned. Some kids specifically that lost a parent were dedicated, if I remember correctly.
And then
but,
again, please.
I don't remember if anyone was this year. I don't think so.
Sure. But again, stretching that ritual a bit, if there's older siblings, wouldn't that be tender and sweet if they actually had some vials of that water that was being used to bless, and they again had this broader image, and maybe invite to even bring that to the classroom and talk what it's like now to be a sibling of this new infant in their family, and what are some ideas that they want to make sure that infant experiences, whether it's just the fun, perhaps they love the Halloween celebration at the congregation. If your young people can actually know that there are predictable things happening in the year that they can look forward to and tell the younger kids about, oh, you know, then we do this, you know, you're building community.
Yeah, and I see that happening here. The kids were really excited about the Halloween party this last week. And another thing we do in CFD is we do a take apart party, I know. So that's been a tradition at least the last couple of years. And we're planning on doing that this next month. I remembered what I was gonna share too that had slipped my mind, is that it's nice that once a month we do give the kids a chance to be the ones up front for the whole, most of the portion of blessings and sorrows, and we use rocks and shells for that with them. So during our all generations, we're able to have them up front doing that, which is nice, because otherwise, I mean, they still have the chance each week that we have our normal service where they go downstairs about halfway through, or I would say a third of the way through the service. They still have a chance to share, but I would say a lot more of them shy away compared to if they're already up front with us during a story, then it encourages them to share.
That's wonderful. Often our young people, and including our children, will save something. They simply only feel that they can, in a trusting way, share at church. They will often carry something in their hearts all week long. I've had many kids say this to me. And so giving them that conduit, and again, a trusting environment with loving adults where they can name those things, is so important and so affirming.
And so I think the other 3 Sundays of the month when they can share in our small group is good for some of them that might shy away more.
How about community singing? How important is that in the life? And I realize we just have 2 minutes left, but it's a way to really approach this whole church and make sure your kids and youth all have a repertoire of songs that they can sing. Do you all put a big emphasis on singing, anybody?
This Little Light of Mine is one we sing each week together.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Anyone else?
Yeah, we do a lot of singing as a congregation. In fact, when the group started this, one of the things they wanted to bring, when the founders, was a lot more singing and music into the congregation. And so I developed poster size of songs so that the children have those in front of them, and they follow along and sing with us. And we actually even made up some songs that are welcoming songs for our children. You know, they're familiar tunes like, I can't remember the one, but it was one I had learned in the Methodist church about my church. No, it was To Jesus Loves Me. That was it. But we changed the words to My Church Loves Me, This I Know, for they always tell me so. You know, so we would sing that to the children, and they would get to know, because those songs were important to me as a child, to leave my church knowing those songs, and I could sing them, you know. So we wanted to teach our children some of those songs that they could carry in their hearts too.
Faith development happens in our hymnody. If they can actually have songs that they can sing with the whole church. And in our last minute, just one other idea. So if you look at the link about the water ceremony, the water communion, you'll see some examples there. So one community decided that because I believe, and this is true of this community, every Unitarian Universalist should know the song Blue Boat Home by Peter Mayer, especially from Minnesota, Macy. He is from Minnesota. So if this is a part of our repertoire, what they did was they wove it into their water ceremony, and they had everybody write something on a ribbon with water-soluble ink. What's the kind of ink that won't wash away in water? So it was insoluble, whatever. So the writing remained on these ribbons that were put into the water. And then they ended up using the ribbons and made this beautiful boat image where they wove it like a tapestry, which is a permanent part of their RE program. So all the wishes and dreams, and so they were singing Blue Boat Home, and this was all a part of the water ceremony. So there's ways to really grow in this consciousness. But I see our time has come to an end. We want to thank you so much for taking part. Cameron and I want to be on this journey with you. Often you have to reach us virtually, but we encourage you to do so. This sort of series, we want to be responsive. We encourage you, when you receive the evaluation, please fill it out and be candid and let us know what other sort of series that you would like, or sort of webinars that you would like, and know that we esteem and consider it vitally important, the blessing of our smaller communities. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate you taking part this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.